If you are a Sigma INFJ, who has ever felt the weight of your own depth, who has been told you overthink, feel too much, see too much, this is your story. If you have ever wondered why the world feels like a place you observe from behind glass, why your gift for understanding others leaves you exhausted and alone, why your independence reads as coldness when you are simply protecting what remains of yourself, then what follows is not just analysis. It is recognition. The mythology of the Sigma INFJ has become a kind of modern archetype, a lens through which rare, independent, introspective personalities see themselves reflected with sudden clarity. We speak of the gifts, the visionary insight, the quiet power that comes from walking alone. We celebrate the refusal to conform, the ability to see through facades, and the depth of understanding that makes others feel seen. But there is a shadow to this archetype that few discuss, a cost to this way of being that is rarely named. Jung spoke of the shadow as the unconscious aspects of the personality that the conscious ego does not identify with, the parts of ourselves we repress or deny because they threaten the image we wish to maintain. For the Sigma INFJ, the shadow is not a distant, theoretical construct. It is the lived experience of a personality type that operates at the edges of social comprehension, that sees too clearly, feels too intensely, and withdraws too completely. It is the loneliness that comes not from being unseen but from seeing too much. It is the exhaustion that follows understanding everyone except how to be understood. It is the quiet rage at a world that demands performance, when you can barely manage to be present. This is the dark side of being a Sigma INFJ, the truths we do not post on social media, the struggles that do not fit neatly into listicles about strengths and gifts. This is the story of what it costs to be a person who lives in depth when the world rewards surfaces, who seeks meaning when others seek comfort, who refuses to conform when belonging is the price of visibility. These are the shadows that follow those who walk alone, not by choice but by necessity, because the alternative is a kind of self-erasure that feels worse than isolation. The first shadow is the loneliness of depth in a shallow world. The Sigma INFJ does not experience loneliness as a lack of people, but as a lack of connection that matches the intensity of their inner life. Others can surround you, engaged in conversation, even liked and respected, and still feel profoundly alone because no one is meeting you where you actually live. You exist in layers. Your thoughts spiral into philosophy, psychology, meaning, and pattern. You notice the unspoken, the subtle shifts in tone and energy, the contradictions between what people say and what they feel. You think in metaphors and archetypes, in mythic frameworks and existential questions. And then you surface into ordinary conversation, where people discuss the weather, weekend plans, and surface-level complaints, and you realize with a quiet, sinking feeling that you cannot bring your authentic self into this space. You have learned to code switch, to perform a lighter, easier version of yourself that will not make others uncomfortable. You nod, you smile, you contribute just enough to seem engaged without revealing the chasm between your internal experience and theirs. But this performance is exhausting. It is a kind of slow suffocation, a constant reminder that your natural way of being is too much for most people to hold. Nietzsche wrote that the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. For the Sigma INFJ, this struggle is not about resisting conformity in some grand rebellious sense. It is about the daily, grinding effort to remain yourself in a world that finds your depth exhausting, your questions inconvenient, and your silence unsettling. The loneliness is compounded by the fact that you understand this dynamic perfectly. You see why people prefer lightness, why they avoid the uncomfortable questions you naturally gravitate toward. You do not blame them for this. You simply accept that you will always be slightly out of sync, always operating at a frequency that others cannot quite tune into. And so you withdraw, not out of arrogance or superiority, but out of a weary recognition that most interactions will leave you feeling more alone than solitude itself. The second shadow is the exhaustion of perpetual empathy without reciprocity. The INFJ is often described as empathic, intuitive, and capable of reading others with uncanny accuracy. The Sigma INFJ takes this further. You do not just sense what others are feeling. You absorb it, process it, hold space for it, often without being asked. You become the person others confide in, the one who listens without judgment, who offers insight that feels almost magical in its precision. But this gift has a dark side that no one warns you about. Empathy, when it is your default mode, is not a passive experience, it is labor. Every interaction with another person requires you to attune to their emotional frequency, to sense what is beneath their words, to navigate their unspoken needs and defenses. You do this automatically, without thinking, because it is how your mind works. But it is draining. It requires energy, attention, and emotional bandwidth. And here is the cruel irony. The people who benefit most from your empathy are often the least capable of returning it. They come to you when they are broken, confused, or in pain, and you hold space for them with a depth and presence that feels almost sacred. You help them see themselves more clearly, untangle their thoughts, and feel less alone. And then they leave, lighter and restored, while you are left carrying the weight of what they shared, the emotional residue of their struggles now lodged somewhere in your chest. They do not ask how you are doing. They do not notice that you are tired. They assume, because you seem so calm and together, that you do not need what you have just given them. And you, because you understand how hard it is for most people to hold emotional complexity, do not ask for reciprocity. You tell yourself it is fine, that you don't need to be understood in the same way you understand others. But it is not fine. It is a slow bleed, a gradual depletion of your inner resources, that you do not fully notice until you find yourself numb, disconnected, unable to access the empathy that once came so naturally. Jung spoke of the wounded healer, the archetype of the person who has been broken, and, through that breaking, gains the ability to heal others. The Sigma INFJ embodies this archetype, but the wound is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing condition, a cost of being someone who feels deeply in a world that treats feelings as inconveniences. You heal others, but who heals you? The answer, more often than not, is no one. And so you learn to manage your own wounds in silence, to be your own healer, which is a lonely and exhausting way to live. The third shadow is the misinterpretation of your independence as coldness or arrogance. The Sigma INFJ is independent by nature, not because you despise connection, but because you have learned that most people cannot meet you where you are. You have been disappointed too many times by shallow relationships, by people who wanted your depth but could not reciprocate it, by social dynamics that felt performative and empty. And so you withdrew. You've built a life that doesn't require constant external validation. You found meaning in solitude, in your own thoughts, in pursuits that engage your mind and spirit without demanding that you perform a version of yourself that feels false. But the world does not understand this. Independence, especially in someone quiet and introspective, is read as coldness. Your refusal to engage in small talk is interpreted as snobbery. Your preference for solitude is seen as antisocial behavior. Your selective social energy is mistaken for aloofness or arrogance. People assume you think you are better than them, that you are judging them, that you do not care. And the truth, which they cannot see, is that you care too much. You withdraw not because you do not value connection, but because you value it so deeply that superficial interactions feel like a betrayal of what connection could be. You are protecting yourself from the exhaustion of pretending, from the disappointment of investing in relationships that will not sustain your depth. But this is not how it looks from the outside. From the outside you seem cold, detached, and difficult to get to know. And this perception creates a painful feedback loop. People who might have been able to connect with you on a deeper level are put off by the wall you have built. They interpret your guardedness as rejection, and so they do not try. And you, seeing that they do not try, feel confirmed in your belief that most people cannot handle what you are. The loneliness deepens. The walls get higher. And the world continues to misunderstand you, not because you are impossible to understand, but because the language of depth does not translate easily into the language of surfaces. The fourth shadow is the burden of seeing patterns and systems that others deny or ignore. The Sigma INFJ does not just see people, they see beyond them. You see structures, patterns, systems of behavior that repeat across contexts and relationships. You see how power operates, how people manipulate, how social dynamics reward performance over authenticity. You see the contradictions, the hypocrisies, the ways people lie to themselves and others, and you see this not because you are cynical but because you cannot help but see. Your mind is wired to notice patterns, connect the dots, and understand underlying dynamics. This clarity is both a gift and a curse. It allows you to navigate complex situations with insight and precision. However, it also means you are constantly aware of things that others are not, and this awareness can lead to isolation. You try to share what you see, to warn people about dynamics that will hurt them, to point out patterns that are obvious to you but invisible to them. And more often than not, you are met with defensiveness, denial, or dismissal. People do not want to hear that they are repeating a pattern. They do not want to confront the uncomfortable truths about their relationships, their choices, their own complicity in the systems they claim to oppose. And so they shoot the messenger. They tell you that you are overthinking, that you are too negative, that you need to lighten up. They accuse you of being cynical when you are simply being realistic. And you, exhausted by the effort of trying to help people see, eventually stop trying. You keep your insights to yourself. You watch people make the same mistakes over and over, knowing you could help, but also knowing they will not listen. This is its own kind of loneliness, the loneliness of seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable illusions. Plato's allegory of the cave describes prisoners who have spent their lives watching shadows on a wall, mistaking them for reality. When one prisoner escapes and sees the world as it truly is, he returns to the cave to free the others, but they reject him, angry at his insistence that their reality is false. The Sigma INFJ lives this allegory. You have left the cave. You have seen the structures behind the shadows. But when you try to share this vision, you are met with hostility or indifference. And so you learn to keep your vision to yourself, to live with the knowledge that you see things others cannot or will not see, and that this clarity will always separate you from those who remain in the cave. The fifth shadow is the exhaustion of constant self-regulation and masking. The Sigma INFJ is acutely aware of how you are perceived. You notice the subtle shifts in people's reactions, the moments when your intensity makes them uncomfortable, the times when your honesty is too much. And because you are empathic, because you do not want to hurt or alienate others, you learn to regulate yourself. You soften your edges. You modulate your tone. You hold back the full force of your thoughts and feelings. You perform a version of yourself that is easier for others to be around. This self-regulation is not a conscious decision. It is a survival strategy, developed over years of being told you are too much, too intense, too serious, too sensitive. You learned early that your natural way of being made people uncomfortable, and so you learned to hide it. But masking is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, a perpetual monitoring of how you are being received and adjusting accordingly. You cannot relax, you cannot simply be. You are always performing, always editing yourself in real time, constantly aware of the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. And the worst part is that no one knows you are doing this. Because you are so good at it, because your mask is so convincing, people assume the version of you they see is the real you. They do not realize that you are working, that every easy smile, every light comment, every socially appropriate response is a deliberate choice, not a natural expression. And so they do not see the cost. They do not see that you go home from social interactions drained, that you need days to recover, that the effort of being around people is so depleting, that solitude is not a preference but a necessity. Jung wrote that the persona is the mask we wear to meet the demands of society, the compromise between the individual and the world. But for the Sigma INFJ, the persona is not a compromise, it is a shield, a barrier between your true self and a world that has made it clear that your true self is not welcome. Maintaining this shield, day after day, year after year, is a form of slow erosion. You lose touch with who you really are because you spend so much time pretending to be someone else. And then, in the rare moments when you do let the mask slip, when you show someone your real intensity, your real depth, and they react with discomfort or rejection, you feel the sting of that rejection so acutely that you retreat even further behind the mask. The cycle continues. The exhaustion deepens, and you wonder if anyone will ever know the real you, or if the price of being known is simply too high. The sixth shadow is the paradox of craving connection while being unable to sustain it. The Sigma INFJ wants a meaningful connection. You dream of relationships where you can be fully yourself, where your depth is met with equal depth, where you do not have to mask or perform or hold back. But even when you find these connections, they are difficult to sustain. Because you are so sensitive to inauthenticity, so quick to notice when someone is not being real, you become hypervigilant in relationships. You analyze every interaction, looking for signs of dishonesty, manipulation, or superficiality. You test people, often without realizing it, pushing to see if they can handle your intensity, if they will stay when things get real. And when they inevitably fail one of these tests, when they prove themselves unable to meet you where you are, you withdraw, you shut down. You cut them off, not out of cruelty but out of self-protection. You would rather be alone than in a relationship that feels false. However, this pattern creates its own set of problems. People who might have been able to grow into a deeper connection with you are pushed away before they have the chance. Your standards are so high, your expectations so specific that almost no one can meet them. And you are aware of this. You know that your need for authenticity, depth and consistency is unrealistic in a world where people are messy, contradictory, and still figuring themselves out. But you cannot seem to lower your standards. You cannot force yourself to settle for a connection that feels shallow or false. And so you remain alone, longing for the very thing you cannot allow yourself to have. This is the paradox of the Sigma INFJ. You need people, but people exhaust you. You crave connection, but connection requires a level of vulnerability that feels dangerous. You want to be seen, but being seen means revealing the parts of yourself that others have rejected before. And so you hover at the edges, close enough to watch, far enough to stay safe, never quite able to cross the distance between yourself and others. The seventh shadow is the weight of carrying your own darkness, without support. The Sigma INFJ is intimately familiar with the shadow, the darker aspects of the psyche that most people tend to avoid. You understand rage, despair, and existential dread. The void that opens up when meaning collapses. You have sat with these feelings, explored them, and integrated them into your sense of self. You do not fear darkness, because you have made peace with it. But this familiarity with the shadow comes at a cost. Because you understand darkness so well, because you can hold it without falling apart, others assume you do not need help. They assume you are strong, resilient, and capable of handling anything. And you are, in a sense. You have developed the inner resources to weather storms that would break other people. But this does not mean it is easy. It does not mean you do not struggle. It does not mean you would not benefit from someone else holding space for you, the way you hold space for others. But no one offers. And you, because you are so used to managing your own darkness, do not ask. You tell yourself it is fine, that you do not need support, that you can handle this on your own. However, the truth is that carrying your own darkness without support can be a lonely experience. It is exhausting. It means that when you are in pain, when you are struggling, and the weight of existence feels unbearable, you must be your own therapist, your own comforter, and your own guide. There is no one to lean on, no one who can meet you in the depths the way you meet others. And so you sit with your pain alone, in the dark, waiting for it to pass. Jung said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The Sigma INFJ has done this work. You have made the darkness conscious. You have integrated the shadow. But the cost of this integration is that you carry a weight that others do not understand and cannot help you bear. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night when the mask is off and the world is silent, you feel the full weight of that burden. You feel how tired you are, how much you have carried, how long you have been walking this path alone. And you wonder if it will always be this way, if the price of depth is perpetual solitude, if being a Sigma INFJ means living in a world where you are always the healer and never the healed. The eighth shadow is the erosion of hope and the temptation of nihilism. The Sigma INFJ begins with idealism. You see the potential in people, the beauty in depth, the possibility of meaning in a chaotic world. You believe that if you can help people see clearly and offer the right insight at the right time, things will change. People will wake up. They will choose authenticity over performance, depth over surfaces, meaning over distraction. But over time, as you watch people ignore your insights, as you see them repeat the same patterns, as you experience the loneliness and exhaustion of being someone who operates outside the norm, the idealism begins to crack. You start to wonder if depth matters at all, if meaning is just a story you tell yourself to avoid the void, if your refusal to conform is not principled independence but pointless isolation. The temptation of nihilism is real for the Sigma INFJ. It whispers that nothing matters, that your efforts to live authentically are wasted, that you might as well stop trying and just go through the motions like everyone else. This is perhaps the darkest shadow, the one that threatens not just your happiness but your sense of self. Because if you lose your belief in meaning, in depth, in the value of living according to your own truth, what are you left with? You are left with the same shallow, performative existence that you have spent your life resisting. And the thought of becoming that, of surrendering the very thing that makes you who you are, feels like a kind of death. Nietzsche wrote about the abyss, about how when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. The Sigma INFJ has gazed into the abyss. You have confronted the possibility that life is meaningless, that your depth is a burden rather than a gift, that your refusal to conform has brought you nothing but loneliness. And the abyss has gazed back, threatening to swallow you whole. But here is what saves you, if you can hold on. The same depth that brings you to the edge of nihilism also gives you the tools to step back from it. You understand that meaning is not something you find but something you create. You know that even if the world does not value depth, you do. You recognize that your way of being, as painful as it is still yours. And there is a kind of defiant beauty in that, a refusal to let the world's incomprehension break you. You will not become shallow. You will not perform inauthenticity. You will not betray yourself for the comfort of fitting in. And if that means walking alone, if that means carrying the weight of your own darkness, if that means living at the edges of a world that will never fully understand you, then so be it. Because the alternative, the surrender of your depth, is a price you will not pay. The ninth and final shadow is the fear that you will never be fully known or loved for who you truly are. This is the deepest wound of the Sigma INFJ, the fear that lives beneath all the others. You can manage the loneliness, the exhaustion, the misunderstandings. You can carry your own darkness, resist nihilism, and maintain your independence. But the fear that no one will ever truly know you, that no one will ever love the real you, rather than the mask you present, this fear is the one that keeps you awake at night, because you understand, with painful clarity, how much of yourself you hide. You know that the version of you that people see is carefully curated, that you have learned to present only the parts of yourself that others can handle. And you wonder, in your most vulnerable moments, what would happen if you let someone see all of you? The intensity, the depth, the darkness, the need, the longing, the parts of yourself that are too much, too strange, too difficult to explain. Would they stay? Or would they do what others have done, which is to back away slowly, overwhelmed by the fullness of who you are? This fear makes intimacy terrifying. It makes you hesitant to let anyone get too close, because closeness means vulnerability, and vulnerability means the possibility of rejection. And rejection, when it comes from someone you have allowed to see the real you, is not just painful, it's devastating. It is confirmation of your deepest fear, that you are fundamentally unlovable, that your depth is not a gift but a flaw, that you will always be too much for anyone to hold. However, here is the truth that you need to hear, even if you don't believe it yet. There are people who can meet you where you are. There are people who will not be overwhelmed by your intensity, but will be drawn to it, who will not find your depth exhausting but exhilarating, who will not ask you to mask, but will love you precisely because you refuse to. These people are rare. They may take years to find, but they exist. And the work you have done, the integration of your shadow, the refusal to betray yourself, the willingness to walk alone, rather than settle for a shallow connection, all of this has been preparing you to recognize them when they appear. You will know them because they will not ask you to be smaller. They will not be intimidated by your insight, or uncomfortable with your silence. They will meet you in the depths without fear, without judgment, and they will see you, not the mask, not the performance, you. And when that happens, when you finally experience the relief of being known and loved for who you truly are, all the loneliness, all the exhaustion, all the years of walking alone will make sense. Because you refused to settle, because you valued depth over comfort, because you were willing to pay the cost of being a Sigma INFJ, which is the cost of living authentically in a world that rewards performance. And that refusal, that willingness, that stubborn insistence on remaining yourself no matter how hard it gets, is not a wound. It is your power. It is what makes you rare, and strange, and deeply, achingly human. If you have made it this far, if these shadows have felt familiar, if you have seen yourself in this exploration of the dark side of being a Sigma INFJ, then you are not alone. This is the paradox. That we who walk alone are not actually alone, that there are others out there carrying the same weight, sitting with the same darkness, longing for the same depth. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What resonates most? Which of these shadows feels heaviest in your life? How do you navigate the loneliness, the exhaustion, the misunderstandings? Share your story. Let others see you. Because in sharing, in naming what we carry, we create the very thing we have been searching for, a connection that meets us where we are. And if this exploration has been meaningful to you, if it has helped you feel seen or understood, then subscribe to this channel, because this conversation is not over. There is more to say about what it means to be a Sigma INFJ, about how to live with depth in a shallow world, about how to hold on to hope when the weight gets heavy. And I want to continue this conversation with you, to build a space where depth is not just tolerated but celebrated, where we can explore the shadows without fear, where being too much is finally enough. Thank you for walking this path with me. I will see you in the next one.